Somewhere out in cyberspace, they're filling in the human race on cloud computing's latest tech or the history of the internet. What will they cover this time? I hope it's robots or AI. Their agile minds crunch the data fast to bring you the Clearly Cloud podcast.
Hello, and welcome to episode 9 of the Clearly Cloud podcast. I'm your host, Sean Spicer, joined as always with Conrad Agramont.
Howdy.
And today we are going back in time, back even before class of 93.
Now, go ahead. So who did we have on?
This week is Bruce Wyman, also known as Blues, the former sysop of The Grotto and SoftWorks BBSs. So looking at where online communication and online communities were and giving some insight into what we may never get back to.
I don't know. It was an interesting discussion. I think, there was a lot around BBSs and for those that maybe never was around a BBS, and we'll let Bruce talk a little bit about what it is and give a little bit of history on it. What's so interesting, just reflecting about how, online communities have just, as just constantly evolved and taken shape into new things. But it is this desire, I think, even it's interesting now we're in COVID, where there's this desire to be together with people. Right now, people are losing their minds because you can't do it physically. But even online, there's this draw to be together on the topic or whatever that might be. And it's evolution, whether you look at like AOL group, Yahoo groups, GeoCities, all of those, there's still this desire. They just keep taking shape. And then you can even say that, Facebook in to some degree was, with its community and groups, was kind of derived from a lot of what these BBSs were.
Yeah, they say that there's nothing new under the sun, and every new idea is just a synthesis of two former ideas. And from Facebook, you saw MySpace. From MySpace, that came from Friendster. Friendster came from LiveJournals, and LiveJournals came from Usenet. And meanwhile, this entire time, Angel Fire and Cloud Cities, people making their own websites. And
there's always this need to communicate in this way, and as the technology evolves, it's like, well, how much evolution could there have with just web pages? I mean, they've gotten better and more pretty and more connected. But I think what influences it even more are how you access it through your phone, through the iPad, your computer, and watch. There's going to be you can't know how these new devices create these new forms of connectivity. But in the end, people are going to want to find things and communicate and have community. I think what was interesting was, because it was smaller in these BBSs, just the community nature around it. And that's the part they said maybe was lost. So I thought it was an interesting discussion with Bruce to just reminisce about what it was, but what it was not just as a thing, but what it was around people surrounding it, which was an interesting perspective.
And I occasionally get asked that question, where do you think technology will be in 10 years? And I have to think back to where we were 10 years ago. And 2010 doesn't seem that long ago. But one thing that Bruce mentioned is we're talking about a BBS where I met him in 1989. And to imagine where we've gone in 30 years, and I think that's a prescient point, Conrad, that it really is how we access it. And that we've got the phones and we have that constant access now. But where will we be in 10 years? I think we need to keep looking at the past to figure that out. And we've had some pretty good guests talking about where we've been and where we're going.
Yeah. Well, and in terms of doing things together and that accessibility and knowing how technology really brings us together, I think that probably guides us right into, our next set of news and topics.
5, 4, 3, 2, bringing you some news.
So it was a semi-slow news week. I was waiting to hear back if Google was going to get antitrust charges thrown against it. That has not happened yet. But on the Google front, Google has this online gaming platform, Stadia. And it's been around for a little bit, and it's a free service, but then you have to pay for the games. And then Microsoft has Project xCloud. Oh, that's some news. The new Xbox went on pre-order and sold out this week. So if you didn't order it, you're not getting it for Christmas.
Ah,
yep.
So angry.
I was on the fence.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm a PC gamer. I'm going to get one just because I like it. I like the technology. I like the fact that it brings a computer into the living room. It's great for watching Netflix. But Amazon this week had their big hardware conference, and they launched that crazy drone security camera, which is, I don't know if I should be more scared of privacy or Skynet. But they also launched a cloud gaming service. So now we've got Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Electronic Arts, and I know there's a couple more. Oh, there's the Sony PlayStation Now, and all of these are services where the console is in a data center somewhere. You don't need a console, so you can play from your phone. This is going to be big with 5G once we have the bandwidth to stream that high quality video. But with a wired network, it runs just fine. And you don't have to. Microsoft said it as get rid of the load screen. But Amazon's model is more of cable TV. So you're going to have to buy channels. And inside those channels are going to be groups of games. And the first publishing partner that they talked about is Uplay, is probably going to put their entire library on there. So they've got the software. I'm just kind of curious to see how that's going to compete with the console makers who are doing this.
Yeah. You know, it always comes down to the games, right? It's what they always talk about, platform games. You know, I know there's going to be some thoughts around, well, kid, you know, when you do gaming, it's everybody knows not only is a lot of computing, but the graphics have to be amazing. Nobody wants to play a game with any lag. Can the internet keep up? Well, if the internet can't quite keep up, you know, just look at history. Now, doing this during COVID probably makes it even harder to really go do because there's just so much congestion, even more so than before. But look what Netflix really came out to do with streaming services, and then other people came up. It was like, well, you can do movies in high quality because the internet's not there. When there's a demand for more bandwidth and usage, providers will step up. I think for Amazon, it's going to be, you know, what are the game collections and how do you play it? I mean, some people just love PlayStation because they just love the controller. Xbox, a little bit of the same, but they kind of lean towards the games. Amazon, I just don't know yet.
Right. And it's not particularly cloud related, but this week, Microsoft purchased ZeniMax Media, and that is the parent company of Bethesda, who makes Fallout and Elder Scrolls, but it also owns ID Software, which owns Doom and Wolfenstein. And the big thing with Microsoft is after they delayed Halo, they said, oh, Microsoft doesn't have any exclusives coming out on launch. PlayStation does. So it was a little bit curious to see where that would wind up, but remains to be seen. But Microsoft definitely has a library. PlayStation definitely has a library. Let's see what Amazon does.
Yeah, well, they're jumping into a very interesting, you know, field of competition, but you know, I think they see themselves as they're more now than just I don't know. It's like, you know, where Microsoft has done a lot around applications is around the dev tools, right? And you know, platform, Sony platform, and the gaming. With Amazon, it's trying to do distribution without having a real platform. I wonder if this is really better news for game publishers or maybe independent game publishers that have more ways to distribute it, because you know you can stream these things out. You know, they don't have to worry about boxing up games and maybe get a broader audience. But you know, when everybody thought it was about that, remember many years ago, then out comes Nintendo with the Wii, casual gaming, right? But people got over it. So I don't know. It's gonna be fun to watch.
Yeah, and the interesting thing as well is I mentioned that PlayStation has a service. Nintendo has its service as well. It's not so much cloud gaming. However, where do those both live? In Azure. So, very interesting to see PlayStation decide that they're going to host their cloud gaming platform in Microsoft. And I think there's just the point that Sony doesn't want to build data centers. Just like people probably don't want to buy consoles. They'd rather just stream and game. And I think this is another case as to the future of the cloud. But we were talking earlier about BBSs, and we're going to have a much longer conversation here in a bit. And talking about online communication, great feature came out on Twitter. It's one of those things where I'm amazed they didn't think of it sooner. But Twitter is rolling out a feature gradually to everybody. I guess it's already been with a limited few. I can think of who those limited few might be, but there's going to be a warning on Twitter, and it already exists on Android, that if you click to share an article, but you haven't actually clicked the article to read it, it's going to pop up with a prompt saying, would you like to read that?
So you're saying that I can't send you any more of these links like, hey, this is a really good article you should read on some cloud compliance. But then when you click on it, it rickrolls you. You're saying that it's going to prevent that now.
I don't think it'll prevent rickrolling. Rickroll will find a way. You've seen some of the creative rickrolls I've pulled in our water cooler channel.
I know, but no, I think it's interesting. I think both. Maybe it helps people to like, oh, that's good, but maybe a reminder. Maybe you should read things before you send them. And retweet them out. So I think that could be useful to help remind people to do that. But some people they'll just ignore and say, yeah, I don't care. But I think it's an interesting way to I don't know. I guess maybe help more on marketing, but also prevent like a lot of misinformation to maybe show you preview or something. I'm interested to see how it works.
Yeah, Twitter said the motivation was to help promote informed discussion. And the Twitter communications team said, we shouldn't have to say this, but you should read an article before you tweet it. And so they gave the prompt. But what they said their findings were in the initial beta test is that people opened articles 40% more often after seeing the prompt, that people opening articles before retweeting increased by 33%, and a large number of people wound up not retweeting after opening the article. And what they said, that's fine. Some tweets are best left in drafts. So hopefully it will reduce the misinformation. And yeah, I've just seen so many of those things, clickbait, where the headline has nothing to do with the story, but people just want to share it because the headline seems compelling.
Right. I'm sure somebody's going to say, oh, I don't need Twitter coddling me. Well, you probably read it anyway, so maybe it's not for you.
Yeah, and a clickbait title, not really clickbait, but the CISA announced that the feds were hit with a successful cyber attack and that data was stolen. And so, of course, I immediately click on this article because I want to know who. And the CISA is the United States Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. They had their second week of their big conference this week on Wednesday. Really, really informed conversations there. But they didn't tell me who was breached or what data was stolen. But they did go through a great write-up on Threat that explains how it was carried out.
Yeah, I think that what was interesting is when they talk about it, it wasn't just one thread in. It was really the way of, hey, if you go into I think it was Secure VPN, it's a web-based one. So if it's running, it goes in and it can see it, hits an exploit, moves to the next piece. They get a piece of information, then they connect to Office 365. Like it just kind of, you see the daisy chaining, and you just see that it's the attacks are going through, in this case, it was a third-party application that runs on something that then accesses something else and something else. So they're really getting sophisticated.
Yeah, and it is really nice to be able to read an article and see the entire threat chain and see how that lateral expansion moves and what the bad actors were able to do in the process. And they say the attack has been remediated, but they don't know when it actually took place. So CISA has a system called Einstein, which is an intrusion detection system that monitors federal civilian networks, and they recognized the potential compromise and went in and started to do research with the affected agency. So maybe that information will come out in the coming weeks, but right now it remains a mystery. But as I said, it was kind of a slow news week. Why don't we get on to the guest?
4, 3, 2, 1, having some fun with guests.
And And today we're joined by Bruce Wyman, the founder and president of Brew Lee Music and a Josie Award nominee for Song of the Year, as well as a number of other accolades. How are you doing today, Bruce?
I am doing just peachy, busy as always.
I hear you. And you've got quite a bit going on right now. What projects are you working on at the moment?
We right now have over 80 projects currently working. We're going to bring on new artists after the first of the year, and our other artists are working like crazy right now. And we just promoted my daughter Lindsay to executive vice president, and she'll be opening a New York office after the first of the year.
Oh, wow. So expanding. Well, today we're not going to be talking so much about music. We're going to be talking about the history of online communications. And want to tell us a little bit about your history there, Bruce?
Oh, my God. That goes way back. Yeah. Well, I was back when I was in college, back in the dark ages. I had several jobs working in the computer field. I worked for several service bureaus and, working nights. This was back when it took two floors of an office building just to house the same computing power you've got in a wristwatch. So, but it was interesting. It was fun. Met some very, very cool people back then. And, the advances in technology, they're just mind boggling.
And the way you and I met was at the time, this was back in the late 80s, I believe it was you were the sysop of a couple of BBSs. What were those?
Well, we had SoftWorks BBS, which I had originally come up with that to actually as part of customer support, because I was selling computers at the time part-time and doing some service work out here. But the fun part was the actual bulletin board system, and they were starting to catch on in mid 80s. And of course I got pretty heavily involved in them, and they eventually settled on a platform that we really liked and stuck with it. But it evolved and grew along with the technology, but it was a community. And I mean, we were doing things back then that nobody done before. So, there weren't any rules or guidelines. I guess we were creating it at the time. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that word community. I love that word community. Yeah, I love the word community because that's what they were. But for those of our listeners that aren't familiar, can you tell us what a BBS is?
Well, wow.
Is or was.
This goes back to analog phone lines, and when we had where you used a modem to communicate, and one person could be online at a time because it was a voice grade phone line, and so you really couldn't. There was no such thing as having multiple users or anything like that. But what we did is that, people would basically they'd war dial the BBS to get online and go through the messages and participate in the message basis, which is actually the core of this online community. And we had people from 11 and 12 years old all the way up to in their 70s. The one common denominator was the creative inclusiveness of the entire community. It was fertile ground for new thought and new concepts and ideas, and there was so much growth that came out of that, and that sense of community was. It's difficult to describe in terms of today's concepts. Today grew out of it, but what it was back then was a completely different ballgame. Sean, you were a part of that community, so
yeah, I believe I was one of those 12-year-olds.
Yeah. We corrupted you quite well, I think. Yes.
But now those BBSs kind of really translate to things like Reddit, don't they? Or kind of other online forums for people to connect and have communities and conversations.
Yes, in a way. The problem or the difference, the big difference, was the technology back then was very, very primitive. Right. Very primitive. And so what happened as a result was, I mean, there's only so much you're going to get by reading text that somebody wrote, either before you got online or maybe days before. And so what developed out of this was a sense of the personalities of the people involved. And plus, we did a lot of creative stuff with the software itself. I mean, that BBS was, about 80,000 lines of C code, and which we played with quite a bit to get it the way we wanted. But there was plenty to do while you were online, and the system would eventually have to kick people off because it had to cycle every midnight. And people would be waiting. They'd be queued up in line to log on. Because I guess it was new. It was wildly different, but there was, again, that sense of community, where it didn't matter whether you were 11 or 12 or you were 65 or 70 or whatever. And it's because the intelligence really came through, and we had, it was brilliant. We had people from JPL online, and we're having conversations with somebody who might work for the city or somebody that worked for the school or students. We had a lot of students, a lot of kids. It was wonderful. And the wonderful part about it is that every single user we had online had this sense of value, and it was something that was encouraged. We went to a lot of lengths to throw gas on that fire. And it was fun. It really was fun. I can remember Timothy Leary made a quote back in the early 80s, and he said that computers were the mind drug of the 80s. And we really exemplified that big time. And I know a lot of kids were just, they'd get, as soon as they were done with school, they were online. There was no question.
And coming from my point of view as a user, there was a barrier to entry. So not many people had computers back then. And if you did have one, it was really expensive, or you had managed to get enough spare parts from friends to clutch together your own machine. So all of the users, one, had to know how to operate a computer. This was in the days of DOS. So you had to know that command line. You had to know how to find and download a terminal software. Then you had to learn how to get the terminal software to dial in. And suddenly you just log in, sign up.
Right. Well, this is the same time in the music place where, I think at that time I still had a Sony Walkman. So just give me that part of that timeline and just how fast we moved forward.
Conrad, that was brand new technology then.
Yeah, portable. No, a portable is a boombox on your shoulder.
Whoa. Yeah. But that was, and it was a totally new thing. And, it's like a lot of segments in life, we always looked at it as, hey, this is an awesome time to be alive, because look at the stuff we can do. Because, let's face it, with the electronic industry and computing, it had never been done before. it was brand new ground. There was nothing ahead of it. There was no path to follow. We were the ones that were actually creating it at the time. So it was loads of fun and wildly exciting. And we brought this whole community with us. Sean, you were as much a part of this whole revolution as anybody else.
I ran a couple BBSs, nothing quite like the Grotto, but it was fun. It was fun to set that up. And we had off hours BBSs. So the high school kids would set up, or junior high or elementary school kids would set up BBSs on their home phone systems that you could only call after 9 o'clock at night, after everybody else was going to quit doing it. And I remember my mom getting so mad when she found out that I was doing this and turning off the ringers on all the phones. She's like, what if someone gets sick? And I'm like, oh, give me a phone line, Mom.
Well, while we continue to reminisce on the part side, I think we got to swing it to how does that relate into the transition in towards cloud?
Well, about the time that we were getting into, of course, electronic mail was built into it, software, and that was local. And the internet was still a twinkle in the military's eye at that time. There was ARPANET, and then the universities had managed to wire together. And before that, there wasn't really any internet or anything like that at all. We were in a computer room, we would teletype back and forth. But where it really took hold, where things changed, was we got the idea of what if we networked these machines together. Now, when I say network, keep in mind, this is still running on analog phone lines. Mm-hmm. Well, what these systems would do was it'd boot the users off around midnight, and then you would have a dedicated time where your system would bundle up all this email and the message bases and everything and compress them up into a file, and it would have another node, another system to call, and it would dial into that system, and then it would handshake, recognize it as a network call, and then it would unload its packets and pick up other stuff for the local system or other systems downline. And that's how the whole network operated. Now, this whole thing went on in about, depending on the time zones, but in real time, it took about an hour, I think, tops, for all of the network processing to occur. And it was always timed at midnight for whatever time zone it was. And, and it got a little tricky because we were actually hooked up with both Australia and Japan, and the time zone differences were a little wiggy to figure. So, somebody be getting their network traffic at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and, but it all worked. And that was the beautiful part of it, because each individual system operator knew when their window was. And okay, you're getting booted off the system because we got to do network traffic. And
on the communication side of that, this was great because I was calling a local BBS and I was able to communicate with people from Australia, from New York, but it was slow. Yeah. Because one, I log in, I'm the only person that can be on the computer, so I have to type out my message, and then I come back the next day to see if someone responded. But an email to New York could sometimes take 4 days to deliver because it had one BBS would call another BBS, but it was the start of that global communication.
Well, it was the same topology as Token Ring, and at that time, and you had hubs, and hubs and there were dedicated systems. It was getting to that point where there were dedicated systems, and that's all they did was handle hub traffic. They weren't even open to users. They're strictly network to network, and it got to be pretty sophisticated. And that was about the time that the first very little bitty beginnings of the quote unquote internet started showing up. And a lot of it was just, colleges had nodes first. And of course, the military was there with ARPANET. But this started, and it started blossoming. And well, suddenly you're now going, well, the packet switching and everything is now so fast, and everybody was going to dedicated lines. It graduated from analog to ISDN lines, and eventually it grew out of local networking. It was the same basic structure as what's evolved into like your fiber optic cabling and your multi-channel bandwidth that we've got now. It took off in a hurry, and all of this transpired in just a few years. It was like one day it wasn't there, and the next day, boom, it was all over the place. And
Bruce, you talked about the community and the people that were on the BBS and what it felt like to be on one. How does that compare to the way we communicate online today, be it Facebook or Twitter, the social networks, forums?
It's very insular today. Okay. And I want to say that because there's, a certain amount of that is due to the structure of the platform, but there were several changes that happened that we were still kind of a happy family, even while this whole new internet thing was happening. But what started happening was, well, like with any technology, as soon as the marketing people get hold of it, that's the first death. And then it goes from there. Yeah, anytime. But because of its reach and the speed, and that I think was the speed, that everything was happening all at once. And so rather than having the time to, like having a conversation like we are right now, because this is very similar to how it was back then, was you had a conversation. Somebody would talk, somebody would listen, and back and forth. So there was a much freer exchange of ideas because you had time to ponder and consider the ideas that were going back and forth, amongst the community, if you will, because everybody kind of knew each other. Now, today, nobody knows anybody. And it's just huge. It's massive. Yes, you might know somebody. You might have some friends or your buds that are, on Facebook or wherever. But you've lost that sense of community because there's so much going on. There's no way you can ever capture it all. And right. So that what's happened is that everybody is looking everywhere else. Okay. And you've lost your sense of this community because, it was a lot like small town America, where you could go over to your neighbor's house and, my God, can you imagine this? People used to not even lock their houses. I know that's scary to even contemplate. But
well, I think that's an interesting point too. Is
we all knew each other, and even if because we all had usernames, but everybody knew who that person was because your personality came through, and that's something that you don't have today.
And that was the interesting thing, too, is people today where we have free long distance and just call wherever you want and don't worry about it. In analog phone times, it wasn't even that area codes mattered. You had zones and you had the 3-digit prefix of a phone number dictated whether it was a free call or if it was 50 cents a minute. And let me tell you, I found that out when I was 12, ran up that $400 phone bill, and I learned how to read a phone book after that.
Oh, yeah.
And one, it made you concise when you were calling outside of the area, but it also meant that everybody on the BBS was within a maybe 30 or 40 square mile area.
Oh, yeah, because it was all wherever you could call for free, that's where you went. Mm-hmm. And that's what made that's really what drove the appeal of the networked BBSs, because oh my God, I don't have to. Oh, wow, I can get involved in a message base that's coming out of Virginia. And you still had that sense of community because we got to know each other. We got to know the users on these other systems. So the community actually got quite a bit larger, but there was still, like I said, there was still that sense of community.
Yeah. And I remember the first time you and I met face to face, and I met a lot of members of the Grotto, was you guys just threw a meet at the local park.
We used to call them the bashes. And
that's right.
Yeah. And we would, I remember the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth occasional Grotto user bash. And, and it was great. And it was one thing that Lan and I always remarked about was that and it got to be a kind of a game because we would look at all the people, all the users, because we knew you guys, we knew all of them. But then we would say, oh, okay, I bet that's Sean. I'll bet that's that's Propellerhead right there. Okay. I know who that is, and you could definitely spot the people. And because the personality came through so much in the conversations on the message bases and through email. And for us, it was just being able to observe the behavior online, which was another trip entirely. Because another thing about the bulletin boards was that the system operator could break in at any time and engage the user in chat. And that was usually a little bit startling. And of course, we tweaked the software to make it even more so.
Oh, yes.
Just bang head on keyboard. Yeah, you'll be fine.
And so that was an interesting thing so we could not chat with other users. We could only chat with the person who ran the board. But because it was local, I remember one evening I was logging into the Grotto and I was still 13 or 14. I certainly wasn't hanging out with a bunch of grownups on a Friday night. But you guys popped into chat, and I think there were 10 people over there that I all knew from the BBS, and you guys were doing round keyboard, just kind of teasing me. And that was when I first met your daughter, and I think she was 6 at the time, and she was typing messages to me.
Oh, yeah. Baby starfish. Yeah. Yeah.
And I do think we lack that sense of community in modern communication. And on a platform like Facebook or LinkedIn, anonymity has gone out the window. We don't use screen names anymore. I certainly wouldn't sign into, oh God, I'm going to say it. I certainly wouldn't sign into Facebook as Nightshade. I picked the name when I was 12. Leave me alone, okay? It sounded cool to a 12-year-old. I
got to tell you, Nightshade had a personality that was endearing to us, and that was, sure, it's Sean, but we always refer to you as Nightshade because that was your personality. It just came through clear as day. And let's face it, you were a load of fun.
Well, there was accountability to the small group. And I think that even though we've lost that anonymity with the loss of pseudonyms and screen names on platforms like Facebook, I think we've lost that accountability because we're talking with people that are 500 miles away, and then we're getting involved in conversations with their friends of friends of friends of friends, and there's no obligation to community. Was that what you were getting at earlier?
Yeah, exactly. It's you're going to behave a certain way because every one of us has, here's the boundaries of my personality, and wherever they happen to be. And so it was almost like a trademark where you could always spot that person online because there wasn't this, basically there's a whole lot of fear going on with people who are, well, my name is right there. So people know who I am and blah, blah, blah. And well, we can get into the whole privacy thing later, but it's, there was a sense of, you had a sense of, there was a certain amount of protection in the anonymity, but there was also the realization that Well, nothing is really private,
Right.
And who cares? Because we had a community, and we all watched out for each other. That was it. We'd have some outrageous fun with each other. There's no question of that. But that sense of community tied us together in ways that, well, you and I are still in touch after all these years. That has a lot to do with that.
Absolutely. And I have probably 10, 15 friends that I'm still in touch with weekly that I met through the BBS communities back in the day. Those were my high school friends, because at high school, I had my friends that were randomly picked. But on the BBSs, I had friends that were technically savvy and who could write. Yeah. And I really credit BBSs where I had to communicate by text for building my career as a writer. And a lot of us went into digital marketing.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It was a natural offshoot from that community was you had to learn grammar. You had to learn how to communicate effectively, because you weren't going to be a part of that conversation if you couldn't.
Right.
So that's, there was some definite, genuine value in that, among other things. But it was, that also drove that like crazy. And the people coming out of the BBS community were articulate, intelligent. My God. I was constantly amazed at how brilliant all of you guys were. That, I'm like, wow, and Leanne would say, man, we got a brilliant family. We better bone up on the books.
I remember going out to dinner with Jeff and a number of other members of the Grotto. And you mentioned people who worked at JPL. And that first time I'm sitting down for dinner, I'm like 15. And it's, what do you do? Oh, I'm a sophomore in high school. What do you do? I'm a rocket scientist. Oh, haha. No. Really, she's a rocket scientist. Oh, my goodness. Like putting things in space? Yes. Putting things in space. That's what I do.
Yep.
And so just being exposed to that was great. And I do think we've lost something. And I kind of had that comparison as you were speaking to like fast food. There's no value to it anymore. Do you think that there's a way that we can get back to that with how fast communication is nowadays? Is there a way forward? Or backwards, if you will.
I'm really not sure. That's going to have to be something that's, I don't know whether technology would drive it or what, but I think that, it's obvious, at least to me, that people really, really, really miss that sense of community. They just, you in any conversation, you talk to people and going, man, that was great. Of course, the people who remember those days, the few of us that are left, we're kind of dinosaurs now, but you see it in a lot of people that they're hungry for that sense of family, of community, of whatever, that's just not there in today's culture. And man, I tell you, if I found a way to bring that out, I will be all over throwing some gasoline on that fire. And that was a conversation that Ross and I had several weeks ago. And it was, a lot of us basically got out of the technology simply because it had lost that very sense. And, Ross got into photography and I went into back into music. And so it was, that there was a lot of that, this is something that we saw it disappearing and said, no, whatever it's turning into, I'm not a part of that.
Well, in addition to getting away from technology and going back a little bit, and I think it relates to that fast, slow juxtaposition, is you used to work with gigantic computers as an engineer, and then you got away from that. And where did you go from there, Bruce?
Well, God, in several different places. But I'd always been involved in music. I mean, that'd been an integral part of both mine and Leanne's life. But I did, on the side, I was always doing all kinds of things, but I went to work for the railroad just to pay the bills.
And that I love that you went from being an engineer to an engineer, working from big machines to really big machines.
Yeah. And that was fun. That was a fun job because you couldn't take it home with you,
Yeah, you spent a couple decades doing that, didn't you?
37 years. And
wow.
Loved it. Loved all of it. It was fun, and it afforded me the time that I could spend, obviously raising the family, and it afforded me a lot of freedom and to explore things. Plus, that community there, the railroad community, was very, very much like the old BBS community. And it is to a certain degree still that way today. It's a very unique job, I'll tell you that much.
And during that time, you saw a lot of impacts from technology.
Oh, boy, did I ever. Oh, that's where it kind of just comes right up and slaps you in the face, because it's there, you understand it. And, and I never really got that far away from it. But when it hits home, the old days when we didn't even have air conditioning on locomotives and computer on a locomotive. Are you kidding? What's that?
Yeah, how are you going to connect?
Yeah. And now, it's, you step into the cab of a locomotive and it's actually more complex than an airliner. Than an airline cockpit. Wow. And yeah. And there's actually, I think there's actually more rules. Matter of fact, I did talk to a pilot a while back, and we compared notes, and I had more rules than they did. And of course, ours are written in blood too. But,
yeah, and I think there's an interesting parallel there.
Yeah.
Between the trains and the BBSs, and then nowadays everybody's in cars and there's Facebook and Twitter.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, and it was funny because, a few years back, I was looking for a car, and I told the salesman, I says, I don't want a car that thinks it's smarter than I am. And I said, I'm sorry. I know all about the technology, yes, it does cool stuff, but I also know what its flaws and pitfalls are. And, when you start taking the human element out of the equation, that's not a place I want to go. And this is something also that you're going to see probably coming more and more to the head as time progresses, is that when humans lose touch with their environment, when the technology becomes an actual barrier to the old, let's get our hands in the clay, then you've got some serious issues. And
wow,
I see it.
Wow, Bruce, we've spent the last 2 weeks talking about artificial intelligence and privacy and legislation and where that's going. And that feeds in so well because of that black box. What an insight. Oh, yeah.
Oh, it is. It is. It's really, really something that's, and I like using the analogy of, I'm going to get a car. No, I don't want it smarter than me, because I still have a sense of personal responsibility. And I want to create my own life. That's so much a part of the human element that, it's how we're here. I don't want to wake up in the morning and have everything done for me, quote unquote. Where's my choice in all of that? So this is something that is, yes, it's high time it was addressed. It should have been addressed 20 years ago. But the thing is, the fact that somebody is actually looking at it I mean, that was one of the, conversations that Ross and I had was, where is this thing going to end, because I don't see human evolution keeping up with the technology that is, becoming more and more pervasive.
I think it almost becomes inevitable that something's going to happen. Bruce, thank you so much. Having the historical insight on where we are today, and you are still very technically savvy and still very involved in this, but being able to see where we have come over these years from 300 baud modems where you could type faster than your screen updated to today where we communicate before our, today when we can talk faster than we think. It's been very valuable. So we mentioned at the very beginning that you're the founder and president of Bruley Music. You are doing some awesome stuff in the music scene right now. How can people find your music?
Oh, it's easy. Our artists are all over. They're on Spotify. They're they've got YouTube channels set up. Lindsay, of course, is obviously very, very involved in the marketing end of this thing. And we have got you're going to, in the next 6 months to a year, you're going to see some absolutely amazing stuff coming out of us. And it's a global community. We're one of the groups that is on our roster as people from here in California, guitarist in Australia, a keyboardist in Arizona, producer over in Italy, another guitarist in France. And these people are all part of the same group. And so we're utilizing the technology to create this. I can't even use the word band because it's beyond that. And the sound, let me tell you, in 2 years, everybody's going to be listening to it. But that's the stuff that, we are, and my peers and colleagues, that's the stuff that we're creating right now. It's the stuff that, once we can get over this mainstream stuff, this is what everybody's going to be listening to. And, hey, it only took 11 years for La La Land to make it to the screen. Maybe I won't make it, but the stuff that our guys are making definitely will. And that's where technology is on our side.
I love it. Well, thank you again, Bruce. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast, and I look forward to our continued conversations offline.
Thanks, Bruce.
You got it, Sean. Thank you very much. You guys have a great day.
You too.
Holy smokes, here comes some really bad tech jokes.
Conrad.
What's up, man?
Be serious.
Well, that one's easy.
Oh, there's some really, really bad computer jokes out there that I'm not willing to say on the show. And there are some bad ones that don't make any sense. I mean, it's a lot like the jokes on the popsicle sticks. And it gets a little bit difficult. I really wonder if there's can somebody write a program to make good computer jokes?
Oh, some AI? No, the computer. Why would the computer AI create good jokes about itself? Because then it would just show that it's poor. I mean,
well, self-depreciating humor is always good.
No, that's true. But it really comes down to what really the software developers want to create. I was looking for asked somebody, I was like, hey, where's this one software developer go? He says, I don't know. He ran somewhere.
I think that was an AI developed joke. Making fun of the developers. So, how many DevOps practitioners does it take to change a light bulb?
One?
None. It's a hardware problem.
Oh, so terrible.
We're getting down to the bottom of the bucket. We're gonna have to start making up our own jokes.
That would only make matters worse.
Probably. Well, thank you everybody for joining us for episode 9 of the Clearly Cloud podcast. If you haven't already, give us a like and follow if you're watching on YouTube, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks a lot and have a great day.
Somewhere